This is Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Here are your hosts, Dr. Tim Slecker and Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, educated educators talking education.
Yes, it is Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education. Wednesday classes in session. Johnny Lupinacci, good to see you, my friend. How are you?
That's good, man. You know, it's always a good day teaching when we get together and then at the end of the day have great conversations about education. So I couldn't be happier to be here. Tim, man, one of my favorite partnerships, one of my most favorite, resources as a teacher and as a teacher educator, always rethinking schools when in doubt. And I'm thinking, what can I do? Or how can I be a better teacher? Or, how can I teach certain topics that are really important to me and most often so important to my students' lives? Rethinking schools. And so excited about our guest tonight and super excited about, the publication, Transgender Justice in Schools. It is just a rocking book. My students are loving it. The teachers I work with absolutely have found it to be invaluable. So, Tim, I couldn't be more excited for our segment today.
I'm telling you about it too, man. I am excited. And as you point out, Johnny, thanks for, making sure everybody realizes that partnership with Rethinking Schools, Busted Pencils, because, man, you say it's the go-to resource when you're thinking, wait, I need a way to imagine something that's different. It's like, hey, guarantee you Rethinking Schools is your resource to go to. Hey, John, I'm going to just jump right in there. He is a high school science teacher in Denver, Colorado, a first-generation Chinese-American Canadian, and a proud transgender man who uses he, him pronouns. He is a recipient of the 2021 NEA Human and Civil Rights Award and the 2020 Teaching Tolerance Award for Excellence in Teaching. He's also the co-founder of the Colorado chapter of the Transgender Non-Binary Educators Network, that's 10, and actively trains teachers nationwide on creating inclusive biology curricula. Welcome to Busted Pencils, Sam Long. Sam, what's happening, our friend?
Hi, thanks for having me. I just had a nice day at school as well, and really happy to be invited to join you on the podcast today.
Well, we appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with us. We've had this partnership with Rethinking Schools now for going on 6 years. And so to always bring the authors and the great teachers that are doing that work for Rethinking Schools is just something Johnny and I look forward to every time we have this segment. Your latest post, Johnny referenced the book, but you also have Diversity is What Makes It Interesting to Study Living Things, currently in Rethinking Schools. Sam, I got some prepared questions, but jump into it. Tell us about the topic here specifically in that Rethinking Schools article. Diversity, that's what makes it interesting. And I know Johnny Lupinacci is going to have some questions because he is always pushing on that diversity button. Sam?
Yeah. So diversity, when it comes to biology, we're teaching about living things, human, non-human living things. And the article in Rethinking Schools really came out of my wish to share with other science teachers. Here's a new way that you can think about diversity. Traditionally in science and especially in medicine, any body or being that's different is just been classified as that's pathological. You're outside of the norm. That's bad. We should figure out what's wrong with you and make you more like what's average or normal. But that's not the only way that we can look at living things. We can look at variation as something interesting, something to be learned about. Darwin named variation as necessary in order for natural selection to take place. So that's very different from any view in science that says something that's variant is something that's bad or abnormal in some way. For me, I'm a transgender man and an out trans teacher since the first year I've been teaching. So I couldn't go into my biology classes and teach that, okay, there's only men and women, there's only XX and XY chromosomes, and anything else outside of that either doesn't exist or is not worth learning about. I couldn't say that to my own students that already knew that my story and my identity was more diverse than that. So it started out of just the need to, how am I going to teach authentically to my own students? Then after a couple of years, I got some positive feedback from students saying, I wish that we had learned about this earlier. I wish that we would talk more about human variation in science. They didn't get a lot of chances to do that. And so the article, Diversity is What Makes It Interesting to Study Living Things, was my kind of debut to try to show teachers another way of looking at variation in a way that interests students who might not typically show a strong interest in science. If you show a connection to social identities and you show a connection to diversity as an interesting thing, they might show more interest in science if it's framed in that way.
Nice. Johnny Lupinacci, I know you got some questions.
Well, I mean, more than just questions.
I know, right?
Appreciate the work that you do, Sam. Appreciate that work that you're doing to say, hey, diversity is so much more even than what we often refer to when we're talking about diversity. Not only what scientific, community is teaching us about, our limited historical view on genders. It's not just even limited, highly problematic and exclusionary and harmful to the diversity of ways we not only identify, but we exist. So it's really so helpful to hear a science teacher and, you saying this, like, hey, as learners together, we're paying attention to the best evidence we have for the information that we have around diversity being a condition of difference upon which everything exists. It is the fabric of all of our existence. And to limit that and only understand, say, for example, our gender identities as male or female has been debunked, not only by science, but by communities of people who say we are evidence of something very different. So I love how you introduce our listeners, and I can only imagine in your classroom that you really get into that. And so, Sam, tell us a little bit more about teaching science and about like really covering diversity in this really deep and authentic way.
Sure. Well, when we want to classify something in science, we need to ask what's the purpose of classifying things. We're only going to classify in ways that are useful in gathering data and seeing patterns. So we might start by gathering students' knowledge. Most students know that there's something different about the X and Y chromosomes with men and women. They don't know why that affects your physical development. They don't know whether that has anything to do with gender identity, but it looks like it's a useful way to classify things, because if you take like XX mammals in any species and the ones that are XY, they do seem to, in most cases, have some different features. So that's a classification that could be useful, but we can't be so careless as to think that this tells you everything about a person, whether somebody has a Y chromosome or not, that they might tell us whether they're at high risk of inheriting color blindness in genetics, but it's not going to tell us how they identify. It's not going to even guarantee that they have testes or ovaries. There are other parts in development. There's a really complex pathway of sex development in humans and for other species as well. And so I try to bring my students more toward that complex side of sex and gender. I mostly teach 9th grade, and many teachers are concerned for me, like, are they going to understand this? Are they going to understand that there's XX and XY, but you can have XXY or XYY or just one X chromosome? But I really felt that that's something that students should be learning. We shouldn't tell them the generalization. We should show them the complexity first. It gets them interested. It gets them thinking. Is it useful to categorize these things? Is it useful to say that there's two sexes in humans when there's people that have chromosomal variations and hormonal variations beyond that? Is it useful to say men should get a prostate cancer screening when you really mean anybody with a prostate, no matter how you identify, should probably get that screening?
Stan, when you did that there like that, anybody with a prostate, and you make that reference too in the articles, instead of people with ovaries as opposed to women, and using that terminology, my guess is that students, although ninth graders, holy crap, you've got to have some incredibly wild conversations in there. But I wonder this though too, a little bit when a student, a ninth grader, goes home and says, Mr. Long was talking to us, and he kind of put forward that maybe we should refer to people with a prostate, people with ovaries. And, has there ever been a time where a parent has said, hey, Mr. Long, we're having a little of a tough time with this. And if so, if you can talk about that, or if how any teacher right now who's listening to the show saying, wow, I want to dig into this the way Sam, Johnny, and Tim are talking. I'm worried though. Help them understand how to address that worry, because we know it's a real concern, particularly in 2024, the culture war's fully ablazing.
Definitely. And so the language of, say, somebody with ovaries, it's going to be really useful if we're talking about the production of sex cells. Someone that with ovaries can produce a different quantity and size of sex cell compared to someone with testes. It is not given as a replacement for a broad replacement for the word woman or man. So we might be talking about people with ovaries in that lesson about meiosis and the production of sex cells. But when we're dealing with, maybe in the next unit, talking about genetic inheritance, it's going to be more, most genes are not inherited through an X chromosome. But if it were a sex-linked trait, we would be talking about people with 2 X chromosomes versus people with 1, because that's what's going to make the difference as to how many copies of that gene you can carry. And so I try to make it clear to students, this is a functional piece of language that we're using, and we do need to be precise and say what we mean, rather than use sex as a shortcut that's going to be insufficient in describing the processes we're talking about. And I have had families ask questions saying, I didn't know we were learning about gender in your science class, or I didn't know that you guys would be talking about transgender. These usually I feel the concern comes out of they don't know what we're going to be talking about. They, as an adult, may have not learned the complex science, or may not have made that connection that complexity is in every aspect of science. And so why would we treat issues of sex any differently from other aspects of science? Typically, the idea that some of my students might think, oh, he's Mr. Long saying people with testes, that must mean that like maybe we're not allowed to say men in this class, which is definitely not the case. So we'll say men anytime we're talking about a group of people that are men, but I draw their attention to the function of the language. If we were to say, men are 90% more likely than women to be colorblind, first, would anyone that hears us, that they wouldn't really know, are we talking about just people who identify as men, people who are legally men, people who have testes? What do you mean by that when you say that? And they wouldn't be understanding the scientific basis. And so in that case, we would say someone with 1 X chromosome more likely to inherit colorblindness, because that's the chromosome in which you're carrying the colorblindness gene.
Oh, I love this, Sam. It's so inspiring because we talk a lot here on Busted Pencils, and I think a lot of us radical educators are excited about, this generation of young people who are pushing their teachers to be better scientists, better writers, better all these things. And I'm just curious, you've mentioned it a little bit, the engagement of your students and the value they see in this, but tell us a little bit about how they inspire you and what you're seeing in this future generation that's coming out.
I was really nervous the first time I was planning out this upcoming lesson. I knew that the base material had this, felt really uncomfortable stuff about intersex, where it just treated it as a disease and treated it as something to be regarded as abnormal. So I wrote through my notes, how am I planning to present it? How am I planning to respond to the questions from the students? And I guess I was so nervous that I knew I wanted to do it, but I was so worried that there would be criticism from students that after I said all my stuff, no one said anything. The students just kind of nodded, but I said, thank you, because I just felt so nervous presenting this, something that felt so personal to me. I'm not someone who's intersex, and I explained the difference between intersex and transgender. But after that first lesson, a student stayed after class and said, I'm glad that you taught us about this. I've taken other biology classes, and this is the first time any issue of sex, gender, and sexuality has come up. And the student said, well, I'm bisexual. I'm really glad that it's something that we can learn about. Maybe we can learn more about it when we talk about evolution, because he wanted to talk about what's the basis of sexuality in human evolution. And so there's always students in each class who have that interest. Sometimes it's students who they're just glad that the science lesson is bringing in something about social identity, something for them to show empathy about and to find patterns in. And there's students who are openly or not openly transgender themselves, students who have friends, are allies, have family members who are directly impacted by the accuracy of language we use. A lot of students or teachers that I work with, they express that they want to talk about parents and relationships in family in a way that includes the different kinds of families that we have, not just when it comes to gender and say someone having two moms, for example, but their students being raised by their grandparents, students in foster home. And many teachers and many students do recognize the need for language that actually describes how our society is and the variation that we see. Many students want to learn it right the first time and not have me teach them some huge generalization that needs to be added on. It would be kind of to a student that like understands intersex and variations. It would be like teaching students that there's 20 letters in the alphabet and then saying, well, there's 6 more after that. Well, why would you do that?
Sam, the complexity, the inspiration that comes into it with, again, just the biology situating it like that as a science teacher there and bringing that in. I love that part, but I want to also give you an opportunity to talk a little bit too about 10, the chapter of transgender non-binary educators network that you founded. Tell our listener a little bit about that organization. You founded it, how, what was the inspiration there, and what's some of the work that 10 is up to right now?
Well, the Transgender Educators Network, mostly a North American-based listserv group, was started by a friend of mine, Harper Keenan, in around 2015. And a couple years later, I found that I connected with enough educators that either were teaching in Colorado or had recently relocated to Colorado to continue teaching. We started the Colorado chapter, Co-10, and first just for as a means of peer support and a way of connecting with each other. We were all navigating similar issues in regards to how open do we want to be about our identity? How does our administration approach that? Do they see that is that a strength when you have somebody that wants to share their story and be vulnerable and model that to the community? Or is they see it as a liability? Is another reason why parents might complain? And there's a whole spectrum of those experiences. A lot of transgender educators want to share about their identity in some way, and mostly that they wanted to know that they would be supported as any other teacher. Nobody wants to be seen for their liabilities or their weaknesses. They want to be known for their strengths and what is unique that they can bring to their team and their school. So a big piece of the work was increasing our visibility. I don't think most principals even have that on their radar. I could have a teacher who's transgender. I could have a teacher who's, I didn't know they're transgender and all of a sudden they want to transition. Mm-hmm. So we hosted some panel discussions at some local education related events, and our visibility, aside from, say, to other educators, it did a lot for students to see that there's trans teachers. Maybe there's none in my school, but there's trans teachers that are in front of students every day. And even if we do nothing else, we are a living example that it's possible to be a healthy and happy trans adult. Most of the time in schools, you don't see that. You see students, you hear about students, you hear about how at-risk transgender youth are, and you hear about all the ways in which they're not being properly served by their schools sometimes. And even adults might not realize, well, there's trans adults. The only reason they might not be as visible and as present in our education settings is something is stopping them from entering education. Something is stopping them or pushing them out or making it difficult for them to be a teacher.
That's excellent, Sam. Hey, listener, if you're vibing with this, because we certainly are, this is excellent stuff. Remember, if you have a comment or question, you can always call or text us at 608-557-8577. Before we leave, though, Sam, tell our listeners where they can get more of this. You referenced your article. I talked about the Transgender Justice book, but let our listeners know where they can connect with your organization and they can learn more from your wise ways and your courageous teaching.
Definitely. So if you're a transgender educator, trans or non-binary, or want to receive support from the group, then transeducators.com is where you can join the listserv. If you're a science teacher, teach about families, bodies, or reproduction in any way, including health, you can find a lot of ready-made resources at genderinclusivebiology.com and a way to directly connect with us as well.
Hey, that's excellent. Listeners, we love it. We love that you're listening, Sam. We are inspired by your teaching and the hard work that all the folks at Rethinking Schools are doing. So check out all those resources. This is Busted Pencils, educated educators talking education. Thanks for busting pencils with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Our thanks to Sam Long. And as we end every episode, here is your moment of Zen. We don't have to engage in grand, heroic actions to participate in the process of change. Small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. Thanks for listening to Busted Pencils. Make sure you download the Civic Media app. Go to the website. You can download podcasts, or, make sure you're subscribed at your favorite podcast listening device. And as always, too, our mailbag is always open. Drop something in there, 608-557-8577. Catch us this Friday at 6 a.m. for First Downs and Friday Night Lights, or Busting Balls, and thanks for busting pencils.